Visions of the Black Heaven. Written by Daniel Zien, read by Daniel Zien. Chapter 34. They took off the rings and sash as they discussed the evening's events. Everyone felt dizzy and lightheaded as they watched each other return to their original state. Their clothes returned like nothing had ever happened. Lynette was amazed. It was like they were almost migrating from one dimension to another and taking on the physical attributes of each dimension. The rings and sash lay on the table, along with several medallions, when they watched as the door opened and two balls of light appeared, pulling a person in from outside. The door slammed shut, then the lights vanished. A police officer stood inside the cabin. His face was white from fear and confusion. Everyone stood looking around in disbelief as Williams had a confused look on his face. Slowly he came to the reality of what had just happened and realized he was safe. Duke saw he was the same officer who they saw in town with the Schroeders. Everyone watched as he walked around the cabin. He was trained to notice details. He had a perplexed look in his face. This cabin was in such a secluded area and had a totally different layout than other cabins. It looked much larger inside than what he had estimated from outside. The fireplace was large, deep, and tall, larger than any fireplace he had ever seen anywhere else. The insignias on the fireplace hearth puzzled him. The more he saw, the more convinced he was that his grandfather was correct. The flame produced almost enough light to illuminate the entire cabin. The bearskin rug in front of the fireplace was impressive, and must have been the bear that Charlie told him about. He noticed the walls were different, made from a stone he had never seen before. He was not a geologist, but he could never remember seeing a stone like this either. He did not know anyone who had stained glass windows for their house. The geometric patterns were very curious. There were two bookcases with what looked like hundreds of books. Most people in this area could barely read, and books were not a necessity. He heard the bubbling of running water, looked around, seeing the water running in the kitchen sink. He thought to himself, no one had running water this far into the hills. They either had to pump it with electricity, which there was no electricity, so they had to carry the water to the house. But the water was bubbling in the sink. Where did that water drain to? Williams got his composure when he saw Lynette. He remembered the description of her. Height, weight, chestnut brown hair with a streak of white over her right eyebrow. Medium build with a beautiful brown eyes. He looked at the four people in front of him. He whispered, "You must be the missing professor. I found your car where you must have parked it. It is destroyed." Lynette gave the trooper a blank look. "Destroyed? I loved that car." He saw the stairs to the loft and was amazed at the size of the cabin, and the stairs to the loft were a straight semicircle. That was unheard of in these parts. Standing by the table, he saw rings and sashes that they had taken off, along with two gold round artifacts. The artifacts had a strange appearance. Something on it looked recognizable to him. Williams looked at Duke and said, "May I?" Duke nodded yes. Choosing the first medallion, Williams looked at it, saw the solar system. Then turning it over, he saw two faces. Seeing one image was showing instantly. His grandmother's voice shot through his ears. Her mantra, her prayer of protection. She whispered, "Remember to ask how." Then she went back into her chant to her God of protection. Williams gave the other hands a quick look. Everyone had 5 fingers. He looked at Duke, then at the back of the gold artifact, then at Duke again. Williams whispered in his deep voice, "Do you know what this is?" Duke shook his head, no. Looking at the writing closely, he remembered the words of his grandfather. "Avoid the fallen ones, the sky people. They rejoice in death of others." Williams looked at Melody and Lynette and said, "This lettering looks like Minoan." Williams looked at Melody and Lynette and said, "This lettering looks like Minoan. See how the lettering almost seems to be Asian, where the letters are symbolic of ideas? I cannot read it and do not know what it means. Do you have any more of these?" Williams whispered. Duke turned to the table. Choose one. Handed it to Williams. This one looks Sumerian. He turned the medallion over. He saw two images of men. One looked like a farmer. The other one, he felt his face go pale when he saw the warrior had 6 fingers and toes and 2 sets of teeth. Williams had an unsettling feeling about the medallion. He did not know how, what, or why. He noticed the fiber-coated medallion on the table with the same Minoan writing as the medallion next to it. Lynette spoke up. Well, we really do not know exactly what they mean or do, but what we have experienced is that when you touch these two together, it forms a connection. Something happens that we do not understand. I know this sounds impossible, but it seems like 2 dimensions merge into one. We've had beings appear in this room. Then there's the cave. Duke jumped in. See that figure there with the 6 fingers? That comes in here when we connect these 2 together. Williams looked at Duke. With 6 fingers? Yeah, 6 fingers, whispered Duke. Williams spoke softly. Ancient Indian legends talks about the 6-fingered giants who come out of the nothingness, ran down a buffalo, killed it barehanded, ripped off a leg and ate it raw, then carried the dead buffalo back into the nothingness where it disappeared. Duke gave Williams a weird look. Thor was looking out the front door, and he saw a large number of shadowy figures weaving in the trees outside of the cabin. Duke, Thor whispered, we have a problem. If we don't move, we will be overrun. Duke went to Thor's bag of goodies and got the firearms. Williams spoke. Mine didn't work out there. Yours probably won't either. Duke stood up, not sure what to do. A light appeared in the corner, leaving 2 shimmering swords and 2 flaming staffs. The light being looked at Duke, smiled, and vanished. Duke and Thor walked over to the corner, choosing their weapons. Lifting his weapon, Duke ran his fingers through the shimmering of the flame. He sensed a tingle. Not like the burning, like he expected. It felt like a combat battalion, effective and deadly. The harder he swung, the brighter the flame, the farther the glowing extended. It moved smooth, swift, silent. Thor's weapon was solid, balanced just like he liked it. It made a hissing sound like flames whipping through the wind as he swung it. It was smooth, like his mind was making it move. Melody looked at her staff. It was tall as she was, slender handle, light in her hands, flames shimmering off the staff but not burning her. It felt comfortable in her hands, moving with lightning speed. Lynette looked at her staff, almost afraid to touch it. Melody touched it first, showing her that the flying staff will not hurt her. Lynette swung her staff. It felt good, effective, like the staff was connected to her mind. It was just where it had to go, and moved her hands to get the most action with the least amount of effort. Looking at everyone, Thor whispered, we need a plan before we go out there. Williams had a look of astonishment. Why do you need to go out there? What is out there, or who is out there that you need tonight? Duke thought about it for a minute, considered what Williams had to say. He had a point. There was nothing they needed to go out there for. Yet Duke had a puzzled look. Something did not feel right. Looking at Thor, then at the others, Duke said, Captain Williams was right. There was no reason. Williams exhaled a long, relaxing breath, realizing that he was safe for the moment. He might not be among friends, but he knew he was not with enemies either. Lynette spoke up. If we're not to go out there, then why were these weapons given to us? That's a good point, Melody said. Thor asked, what weapons do they have? Melody saw Duke's expression change from a gentle, loving man to a determined soldier as he spoke. Ha! Best way to find out is go out and see, Duke said. Duke spoke as a commander to everyone. We have to do this right. We all have to protect each other. Stand with your backs to each other, forming a box of defense. We always keep the person on your right in your vision. That way no one's left out. We serve to defend one position. What is in front of us? The others will take care of what is in front of them. When there's a problem, we will jump in to help. We must have uniform consistency. Melody and Lynette nodded in agreement and understood. Thor led the way out the door, walking out of the yard. Everyone took their position, forming a box of defense, defiance, and dedication to the survival of each other. Melody swung her staff, getting the feel of it. It spun faster than she had ever felt the staff spin before. The energy made a constant circle of light as the weapon spun. Lynette did the same. The staff felt fast and accurate in her hand. The light from the staff shined off the trees until the bushes started to glow with fire and intensity. Lynette whispered to Melody, "We're fighting shadows. They have no mass and are nothing but the absence of light. That makes no sense at all." "Yeah, you're right," Melody whispered. "None of this whole weekend has made any sense as far as I'm concerned. Only thing I can figure out is that we're in a different dimension, that nothing is the way we expect it to be. So we must be always ready for anything." The air was stagnant, thick, hung heavy in the night. No stars shined as they stood looking for their adversary. "What's that stench?" Melody whispered. "It's so dark out there. The darker than I've ever seen," Lynette pointed out. "The air feels like death," Thor whispered to himself. "Let them come to you," Duke whispered. "We need to keep a clear path to the cabin just in case we need to escape." Thor looked off into the distance and said, "They're coming." Everyone assumed their defensive posture. The shadows hesitated, uncertainty of the enemy facing them. Several shadows charged. The men met them head on, swinging the weapons, punching, kicking, each swing of the flaming sword, exploding shadows into oblivion. Other shadows charged. Melody stepped forward, advancing on the attack. Her staff spin was so intense that it appeared to be one circle of energy slicing through advancing adversaries. Lynette held her own, twirling, twisting, jabbing her blazing staff. Each moment resulted in the decimation of a shadow being. The lightless adversary retreated, reconsidering their strategy. Thor looked around. The shadows were everywhere around them. No one was talking. It was like the shadows were communicating telepathically. The next attack was sudden and cunningly effective. Darkness emerged from all sides as the abominations descended upon the group. Melody and Lynette stood in their defensive posture, fending off a barrage of attacks. Duke and Thor plunged into the middle of the advancement. The more shadows they eliminated, the more came. Duke saw they were losing the battle, shouted for everyone to retreat back to the cabin. Melody led the way, her staff slicing through offending darkness. Several shadows entered the cabin before Duke and Thor could get the door closed and locked. A sliver of darkness opened into a chasm of non-existence. The shadows tried dragging Melody and Lynette into the crevasse of nothingness. A defiant fracture of light opens as a stream of lighted beings entered the cabin. A conflict between the light and shadows ensued. The lighted beings overpowered the shadows, forcing shapes of darkness into the crevasse of nothingness. Melody looks and sees one of the lighted beings that she had talked to earlier. Their eyes met with a lighted being smiles, then diverts his attention, snarling, thrusting the shadows into the emptiness of the lonely black hole. In her mind, Melody hears, "Go to the cave." Lynette saw herself in her mind's eye carrying as many medallions as she could to the cave. Melody yelled, "Follow me!" as she grabbed the medallions and started toward the cave. Duke and Thor followed close behind, carrying the weapons, rings, and sash. Duke closed Grandpa's wooden chest, pushed the lock closed. Running up the stairs, Thor was surprised the massive bed was not concealing the cave. Duke went through the opening last and was puzzled to hear the bed moving back in front of the cave. He wondered, how were they going to get out? Melody saw the boulder covering the cave stairs finished opening before they arrived. The cavern lit up with billions of pinpoints of light as Duke put the lit candle on the crystal platform. Running down and behind the stairs, everyone put their articles into the chest. The wooden chest closed with a resounding thud. Lynette heard a voice instructing her to keep 2 specific medallions, then put the medallions by the slots at the bottom of the stairs. The slots, like she had seen in the Valley of the Spirits forest near Lake Titicaca of the Hayu Baraka Mountains in Peru. Holding the medallions in front of the slots, she felt a force pulling the golden objects toward the indentations in the wall. Everyone heard a soft hum. The wall quivered, changing from a solid stone arch into a wavering, opaque blue light. Duke watched 2 figures walk out of the wavy blue light. One figure looked oddly familiar. He felt his eyes open wide as he recognized his grandfather. They did not talk. Their smiles said everything that was needed. Grandma walked to Melody and touched her arm and whispered, "I've been watching you. I'm so proud of you." Duke wondered what happened to Grandma. Grandpa spoke softly. "We knew about the medallions, but we did not know enough about the capabilities or the power of medallions, or the power or purpose of the medallions. One day when we were just starting after your father was born, Grandma had 2 medallions out. She was looking at them. Then she put the 2 together and vanished into a different dimension. I was not there to see where she went. It took me several years to figure out what dimension she was in and how to get back to the dimension, which was not an easy feat." Melody saw Grandpa's deep blue eyes twinkle in joy as he talked. "Every year that you were ready to visit for the summer, I'd come back to our dimension. It was a good thing there were only 12 combinations, and 6 of those were inaccessible because that stranger in Chicago had bought them off me with the old, worthless battle stuff. We have mountains of those things, but he had never seen any of it, and it was priceless to him." Grandpa smiled in joy as he spoke. "I thought it was rather funny. I sold that man in Chicago worthless medallions. See, these are keys for a specific dimension or destination. A better way to describe it, each set of combination has a specific ability to open a different frequency, assigned destination or dimension. I sold medallions that were not matched, and because of that, he never really understood what he had. He did not know what the medallions would or could do. It is funny, because they were never really anything. The true capability is in one's mind. Because of his genetics, there was something he was capable of doing. He could have opened the dimensions all by himself, if he knew how." Grandpa and Grandma looked at each other as Grandpa continued. "You should see the other dimensions. Things exist you had no idea, you could never even imagine of." They continued talking.